In September 2025, a global manufacturing titan abruptly collapsed into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. First Brands Group operated across 5 continents, employing 26,000 people who manufactured everyday automotive essentials. This chart reveals the discrepancy between public success and internal reality. $5 billion in annual sales was crushed underneath $10 billion in debt. Inside the corporate bank accounts of this empire, accountants found just $12 million. You do not lose track of $10 billion in liabilities by accident. The question is how a vacuum of this magnitude was created, and why the most sophisticated institutional lenders on Wall Street failed to see it forming. The architect of the company was Malaysian-born businessman Patrick James. Starting in 2013, he executed a rapid roll-up strategy, acquiring a portfolio of heritage auto part brands, manufacturing highly tangible goods like brake pads, wiper blades, and fuel pumps. Operating out of Cleveland, Ohio, First Brands presented itself as a gritty, recession-proof industrial conglomerate. They made physical products for physical cars, completely avoiding the intense scrutiny usually directed at volatile tech startups. James used this aura of Midwestern stability to approach prominent institutional investors in New York. Based on the strength of these heritage brands, Wall Street firms gladly provided billions in financing to fund the company's aggressive global expansion. By wrapping complex, toxic debt structures inside the packaging of a boring manufacturing business, First Brands built a financial Trojan horse that bypassed standard investor skepticism entirely. The timeline of the collapse traces back to July 2025. First Brands returned to its lenders, seeking yet another injection of capital. This time, however, lenders requested a standard quality of earnings report before signing the check. The company stalled, and the financing pipeline froze. Concurrently, a sealed 2022 whistleblower lawsuit became public. It alleged that First Brands and its affiliates had systematically undervalued Chinese imports for years, dodging $286 million in United States tariffs. Locked out of the credit markets, the company brought in restructuring advisors from Alvarez and Marcel. Investigators seized 7 million internal documents and quickly uncovered what employees called bridge files, internal spreadsheets designed to map accurate corporate financials onto heavily manipulated versions. The manufacturing operations were a secondary enterprise. The primary business of First Brands was using doctored accounting to secure private loans. The financial autopsy revealed 3 distinct mechanisms used to extract cash from lenders. The first was factoring, a standard corporate practice where a business sells its pending customer invoices to a third party for immediate cash at a slight discount. First Brands routinely sold parts to major automotive manufacturers. In May 2025, one of their subsidiaries issued a completely ordinary invoice for a delivery to General Motors. As this visualization shows, that specific GM invoice was originally written for $179. Internal emails reveal it was deliberately modified, scaled up 50 times to over $9,000, and then sold for cash to a Japanese factoring firm, along with thousands of other fabricated documents. The second mechanism relied on phantom collateral. Management created a network of off-balance sheet special purpose vehicles, or SPVs, to isolate and borrow against specific corporate assets. Following the flow of assets on this diagram shows how the SPVs were exploited. First Brands would take a single batch of physical inventory, pledge it to a senior lender for a loan, and then simultaneously pledge that exact same inventory through an SPV to a separate lender to secure a second loan. To hide the source of this new debt, they used a third mechanism called circular financing, or round trips. The newly borrowed cash was routed through external shell companies and deposited back into First Brands' main operating accounts, disguised as legitimate customer payments. First Brands was using fraudulent invoices and double-pledged inventory to borrow cash, which it then used to pay off older debt. It was an industrial-scale Ponzi scheme, operating entirely on paper. The sheer volume of the fraud requires looking at where the capital ultimately settled. Restructuring advisors traced the diversion of over $700 million straight out of the business. $600 million of that flowed directly into bank accounts controlled by the Patrick James Trust. Instead of funding factory operations, massive corporate disbursements occurred in direct proximity to aggressive personal real estate acquisitions, including a luxury home purchased on the Malibu shoreline in 2019. In August 2021, another series of million-dollar transfers from the company immediately preceded the purchase of a beachfront estate in the Hamptons. Beyond real estate, the diverted funds were used to maintain an absurd fleet of personal assets, including a collection of at least 17 exotic supercars. The daily operating expenses of the CEO matched the acquisitions. Corporate cash paid a $3 million lease for a New York City townhouse, $2 million in payroll for a private family office, and $500,000 for a private celebrity chef. While employees worked the manufacturing lines in Ohio, the architect of the company successfully financed the lifestyle of a Silicon Valley billionaire by draining his own enterprise of every available dollar. The consequences materialized quickly. Patrick James resigned in October 2025. In January 2026, both Patrick and his brother, former executive Edward James, were arrested by federal authorities in Ohio. The Department of Justice handed down indictments charging the brothers with managing a continuing financial crimes enterprise, citing billions of dollars in bank fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The company's former chief financial officer and vice president of finance both pleaded guilty to fraud charges, cooperating with investigators, and leaving the institutional lenders to parse through billions in unrecoverable losses. Wall Street analysts, hedge funds, and private credit firms lost everything on First Brands because they looked at the outward appearance of a stable physical supply chain and chose not to verify the deeply convoluted mechanics funding it. The collapse leaves clear lessons for the private credit markets. First, reported revenue is a fiction until it converts to cash. A company can claim billions in sales, but if those numbers are tied up in fabricated invoices, the value will simply burn up under audits. Second, unnecessary complexity is rarely benign. Special purpose vehicles and off-balance sheet financing arrangements are explicitly designed to isolate risk and obscure leverage from primary lenders. Finally, aggressive debt can mimic rapid operational growth for years, but a balance sheet devoid of actual cash flow will inevitably collapse the moment new lending stops. Behind the complex financial abstractions and the DOJ indictments are 26,000 manufacturing employees whose livelihoods were leveraged, packaged, and sold so executives could lease townhouses and hire private chefs. The fall of First Brands proves that massive scale offers no protection against systemic fraud. When evaluating the rapidly expanding private credit markets, you have to wonder how many other liabilities are currently hiding in the dark.